Hi, welcome to the podcast from the Center for Teaching and Assessment of Learning at the University of Delaware. I'm Rose Muravchick, Assistant Director at TAL, and I'm joined today by Mike Mackenzie. Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Mike is an assistant professor in behavioral health and nutrition and also the director of the Mind-Body Behavior Lab. And he joined us to facilitate our most recent roundtable about mindfulness practices and incorporating mindfulness into the classroom. So let's start with the title, as we often do. What does mindfulness mean for you, and how do you define that in the work that you do?
So mindful for us is really focused around paying attention in the present moment on purpose without a lot of extra chatter. As you know, our minds can kind of wander off all sorts of different places, so we tend to still that narrative a little bit. In terms of the work that we're doing on campus with faculty, we really help them in terms of facilitating their attention, both in terms of concentration and just really simple awareness in terms of what's going on with self and in our environment.
So we did a little icebreakery exercise in the beginning to get people attuned to this way of thinking. So can you describe for our listeners how we started our whole session?
So the beauty of mindfulness is it's really something that you can apply to anything that you're engaged in. And the first thing that we were doing as a collective was eating. So it was an opportunity. It was an opportunity really to just sort of slow down the pace of something that's oftentimes habitual that we don't think about in terms of both the sensation of eating, in terms of everything that's sort of occurring in terms of taste, in terms of touch and smell, as well as just watching where the mind goes when you're engaged in this really simple behavior, whether it's the thoughts of food that you've had that's similar before or other things of that nature. So a very simple awareness practice using something that we're doing routinely all the time.
Yeah, it was a nice way to get us all kind of focused and into the practice of the whole topic, of the roundtable topic, but also so straightforward. You could do that at every meal, basically, the way you begin eating, paying attention, bringing yourself to that focus. So it's easy to replicate, I think.
Absolutely, even if it's just a couple of bites.
Yeah. So our faculty were very interested in this topic. We had great attendance, which lets us know that people are interested in mindfulness practices generally. But what are some of the benefits for faculty in incorporating mindfulness exercises into their classes?
So for our faculty, it's been a really interesting experience here on campus. We were originally approached just to do faculty development and to work with faculty around their own stresses and challenges in terms of living in the academic world. As a function of that, people were saying that this is really great, but we'd also like to see how we can bring this into the classroom. So we've run a couple of initiatives on campus where we're trying to work with faculty to do that. The other thing that we've just recently developed is a one-credit program for undergraduates where they can engage in mindfulness practices throughout the course of the semester. The benefit, I think, for both in terms of what we're hearing is that over time it tends to create more clarity. Stress does become more manageable, and people are noticing that it's highlighting their sort of sense of connection with other people that are both engaged in the program and in terms of other interpersonal relationships.
That's really important, especially this time of year. I mean, we could see in all of our participants that May, this time of the calendar, was pretty rough for everybody. And so even though it seems like it's hard to take some of that time out, there's a real benefit for everybody to develop these habits. Really, it's kind of what you guys were talking about, was small, regular practices, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really well said. So really just can we hone our concentration, our general awareness, and create some useful mental habits?
Yeah, but not everybody is always 100% comfortable with these kinds of exercises. We heard from some of our participants who had a lot of familiarity, so some folks who do yoga, some people who do meditation, who seemed pretty comfortable. But several of our participants described earnestly, how this might be challenging. So what are some of those frequent challenges or roadblocks maybe that people have in trying to adapt to a mindfulness practice?
I think the biggest challenge that we often hear about from people is that they're so busy, where are they going to fit in just one more thing? So a lot of the work that we do on campus is really creating practices that are doable. So generally, rather than taking one or two chunks out of the day to do practices, we're doing much smaller practices that people can intersperse throughout the day.
Yeah.
The other thing we find is that people certainly have preferences in terms of which of these sort of mindful practices are of benefit to them. Some people like a really active practice, like a yoga practice. Some people are more focused on a stillness type practice. Other people are really focused on interpersonal relationships. And the beauty of the work that we do is we can really work with people around what their interests and background are to do something that's a bit more prescriptive that they're more likely to have some success with and continue with.
Yeah, and our participants got a chance to try several of these different kinds of practices to get a sense of what's out there, but I also think that's a good way to model that for students also they have the same challenges. There might be different ways that are more effective for them to also bring more awareness. So they got to practice some breathing exercises. We did some focus and concentration exercises. What are some of the other areas that people focus on in these mindfulness practices?
So you've highlighted a number of areas. So we generally work from 5 different areas. So the practices that are around creating some focus, practices that are just around honing our basic attentional awareness capacities, practices that are focused on the body, so whether that's the breath or some other physical sensation, practices that are geared towards interpersonal awareness and relations, and the 5th thing that we do is really working around what's going on in your external environment that you might be able to calm down somewhat. The example that we talked a lot about was cell phone usage.
Right.
So we know that people are using their cells upwards of 3 and 5 hours a day. It's a lot of cognitive bandwidth to be directing that way, and we find that if we can help people to limit some of those stimuli, that can be really, really helpful.
And that's a great example of something where if you as a faculty member concentrate on developing that awareness yourself, it's easier for you to help your students understand the importance of that. We get a lot of questions from faculty about technology use in the classroom, and this is an interesting way to frame that for students to say, there are challenges that you will face in the rest of your kind of attention span, focus, and concentration because of, as you said, this bandwidth being taken up by other distractors maybe.
Absolutely. This is certainly one of those opportunities to do as I do.
Yeah.
And in working with our faculty, we see that at the end of our time together, whether it's a 6-week program or whatever we're doing, they're often much more aware of how they are engaged in the classroom, let alone some of these practices that they can share with students. So it's an interesting learning curve.
Yeah. Well, we had a great experience with practicing what we were preaching and what you are doing research about. I think this will probably be a regular feature in the month of May, given how stressed everybody is then. And I hope that our participants got a chance to learn about some things maybe they weren't familiar with and get us an opportunity to practice so that hopefully in the fall they can approach all of the tasks they have for that semester with a little more clarity and focus. So thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome, and we really look forward to having more of these initiatives and programs on campus. So this is a great opportunity.
Thanks. So our programming for the roundtables is done for this year at CTAL, but we will be back with more events, more roundtables, and more workshops starting in August. And if you need any more information about other CTAL programs as well as the other roundtables for this year and podcasts, you can visit our website at ctal.udel.edu. Thanks, Mike.
You're very welcome.